Welcome back to the Survivor Indianapolis Season 5 Advantage Island recap show. Here we are for episode 8. So, the Ocho here. Just going to recap it, break it down, talk about what happened. Jam-packed episode, so let's go ahead, Alex, and get into it. We have our returning player challenge. First thing off the bat, let me just say, as the creator of this, I've always had a returning player challenge ever since the very, very first season, which hardly even counts in my opinion, but whatever. I've always had a returning player challenge because for the vast majority, our player base is not really fans of Survivor, not casual at best, and most of them really haven't watched much or any Survivor. And so for these people, it's not like a huge passion. And so the fact that they're willing to come and give 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 hours of their Saturday, I want them to get their bang for their buck, even though their buck is $0. For now, it's going to change next season. But the point behind that is like, you want to stay, you're going to be on the jury. You want to stay, you're going to have a shot at getting back into the game. If you get voted off and you want to leave, obviously, no hard feelings. Gotta go, whatever. But I've always wanted to have a returning player challenge. So the second and third seasons, we had different ways for returning players to get back into the game. One of those seasons, just one player got back into the game, and then season 3, that was you, Alex. And then season 3, we had a like similar to Pearl Islands where we voted to get people back into the game. But what I did differently from Pearl Islands was I had people that were in the game vote for someone that was not in the game to get back in, and then also somebody was out of the game voting for one of themselves to get back into the game. So that was 2 people. And then since then, the last 2 seasons, I've always had a challenge where men competed against men and women against women to get back into the game. One man, one woman. I think it's safe to say my feelings right now are that either we won't have returning player challenge at some point, or we will have just a single player get back into the game. It's just a little bit clunky, a little bit cumbersome to have 2 people get back into the game. It has proven to be very powerful. I always just assumed they'd be seen as big threats and get voted off really quickly, but given that it's a little bit more of a casual player base to the strategy of Survivor, that has not happened in the past. I won't spoil what happens this season, but in the past, if you look back at every season, or talk to me about like the seasons that we didn't have video for. Every time we've had a returning player back in the game, they've lasted several rounds, if not made it to the final 3. So those are my thoughts, my feelings. Anything you have on any of that before we get into this episode's returning player challenge?
Yeah, I will just say this. I mean, when you have your final 6, right? And then you say, we're doing a returning player challenge, and 2 people come back into the game, that is 1/4 of the remaining players are players that have been voted out. So they could easily, work together, talk once they've been eliminated about, hey, if we get back in, let's do this, let's do that. And so now it's kind of like they become a power 2 in a tribe of 8 people now that are fighting for individual immunity. So I do agree with you that there is a lot of ways that you can kind of shift the power to the players coming back into the game. I think, if you go back to season 2 and I was put back into the game, I was viewed as a big threat. I would have been voted out if, back-to-back rounds, if there hadn't been idle plays, one by myself and one by somebody else playing it for me, I would have been voted out early. So, that's why I think with adding one player back in, it does make it a different dynamic because, you don't want to set them up for failure. You want to actually give them a chance. But at the same time, if there's alliances already formed and people have already voted you out, now your back's up against the wall. So I don't really think it's unfair, though, because you're already giving that player a chance to get back into the game. So, hey, it's an uphill battle from here. You got to figure it out. And I think that, going back to one in the future might be the smart idea. But at this point, I understand trying to keep it very gender balanced because it seems like in some seasons that we've played before, it's been the majority of one gender versus the other. And you don't want to have an imbalance when you get to, the final 7, 8 players left in the game. You want to kind of have it very diverse. And that's what makes Survivor fun is when you do see, I like seeing different genders work together. It's a little bit boring, old school, I guess you could say, when it's guys versus girls. Like oh yeah, we're the meatheads. Yeah, let's go. And then you got the girls. You're like, girl power. You got to put the boys out. So it's like you got to find the right balance. I like seeing mixed genders work together. But yeah, I think that
Yeah.
the challenges have always been interesting, and I thought this was a tough challenge. I mean, I did the trial run for this when we
Mhm.
did our testing day, and I'm still out of breath from having to run across all of Dan and Julie's property. And I give them a lot of credit because, hey, if you missed a question, you got to go back out
You
there
gotta run
and
around.
you run some more. And it's just like cardio. It's
Yeah.
it's a pain.
Yeah. So before we get into this challenge, a couple of things that you said, uh, a couple of thoughts really quick. Number one, these players in this game, and I try to do this with every season, they know going into this game, into the day entirely, that there is going to be a returning player challenge. This was not a surprise that it's going to happen. So it was not like the final six did not see this coming. They knew it was going to happen at some point in time. They just didn't know exactly when. And they did know, they not only did they know it was going to happen, but they also knew that there would for sure be a man and for sure be a woman getting back into the game. So I don't like to, as for the production of the game, to blindside the cast with big twists and big things. Small things like a double vote, like, oh hey, both tribes are going to tribal council, like we saw last week, or the week before, where we
Yeah.
had the axe throwing competition where you have individual immunity and both times go to tribal council. That to me is like a small twist. That's not gonna, that should not make or break anyone's game. If it makes or break your game, if it makes or breaks your game,
That's
then you
right.
probably weren't playing a great game to begin with. It's like with Mason can feel swap screwed by a swap, but swaps are standard to Survivor, and he wasn't like in the best position, even though he was in the great position in his original tribe. So like, twists can mess you up, but you also should be playing to try to predict those, especially if production is saying, "Hey, this is going to happen." So that's the first thing. The second thing is, if you're watching this and you're a former player that's hoping for an all-star season at some point in time, don't don't play your game banking on a returning player. Don't bank on a returning player challenge in an
Yeah.
all-star type season. In a newbie season, I think it almost should be at least one, but in an all-star season, I'm right now. My thought process is, yeah, no,
Yeah, and I mean, hey, if you're an all-star, you know how this game works. So you
yeah,
shouldn't get your second chance in the game to come back because, a lot of players in Survivor, like the real Survivor, I think there's only been one time that I can really remember. I know there's different versions of it, but like where they brought like all the players that were voted out, and it was in the Pearl Island
hmm
season where it was all I
where they
forget what
had
their name of their tribe was called, but it was all the ones they had
mm,
voted out. They came back and formed the tribe, and if they won the
the
challenge,
challenge
then they got to vote one person back into the game,
two
two
back in,
people, two back
yeah,
in, and the other tribes had to vote one person off.
yes,
And so,
it's a pretty big shift.
it was pretty wild, and a lot of people hated that twist at the
Yeah.
time, and they didn't go. I don't think they ever did it again like that. So
Well, not like that. I mean, they had Redemption Island, right? That
yes,
happened for two different seasons. Or actually, no. It was definitely more than two because it was the
yeah,
two back to back, and then there was Blood versus Water. And I
hmm
think did both Blood versus Water seasons have Redemption Island?
I think it was just one with Tyson.
Just the one with Tyson. And then you have Edge of Extinction, which is that a season that you have not watched
I have
yet.
not watched it yet, but I knew
But
that was one that you could
yes,
get back into the game. So
yes. So it's not very common, that's for sure, but it
yeah,
has happened before.
so
And then also Winners at War uses Edge of Extinction as a twist as well. So there's
gotcha.
been, five, six. I'm not sure how many I've just mentioned, but somewhere around there. For this challenge, although it was clearly a trivia type challenge, I liked that it was incorporating physicality and some mental. So like you couldn't be terrible at either one of those two things and win this challenge. Um, so that is not surprising that we got Adrian and Chris winners
hmm
out of this. Um, Going into it, I would have thought actually Mason because I overestimated his Survivor knowledge. He has watched a lot of more recent seasons, like the last 5, 10. And I'm not sure he's watched all of the episodes in all of those seasons, but I know he's watched. But I thought he was a bigger fan of the show overall than what he actually is. So I thought he would give the trivia questions because most of them are pretty straightforward. If you've watched the show much at all, you should be able to get many of those questions. Um, but really, I don't think anyone knew the trivia that well.
No, that and a lot of it was old school Survivor. Like we
That's
talked
true.
about,
That is true.
it was like who's famous for wearing a tie dye shirt, Rupert, right?
Yeah, that was
But
one of the
if you didn't watch
questions.
Survivor, I mean, and Mason might not even have been born when that season came out,
I'm sure he wasn't. He's only
or
18, so
so he wouldn't have been born during that season. I think there was a Boston Rob answer, right? If I'm not
there
mistaken.
was a Boston Rob answer. There was something about. how many people have won the game 3 times, which the answer was
Yes.
0.
That's the one I
Uh,
missed when I did. I got all of them right except that because I haven't seen all the seasons, so I was guessing.
yeah, yeah, and also at that point, that was back in like March, April, somewhere in there,
Hmm.
and you've watched several, probably 5, 10 seasons since that point in time when we tested
Yeah.
it. Uh,
But
so,
but yeah, I'm
but
just gonna say like it's one of those things where like it's an interesting way to go about it because a lot of these players, which is it's really funny because I think if you look at the very first episode that we did in the pilot, I don't know how many people I clipped saying I
I
have
don't
no
know any.
idea of I have no knowledge of Survivor. I've never seen the show. I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Chris is calling it survival,
Hmm.
and it's funny stuff because Mason is someone that has knowledge of the game. Leah is someone that has knowledge of the game. I think Anna has a little understanding of what it is, but not much about the game. And then Drew was somebody that said he knew or he watches Survivor, but he still didn't understand how the necklace worked either uh, at the previous
Yeah.
tribal. So, I mean, there's just a lot that goes into the game. There's a lot of different things that change from the first season all the way to where we're at in season 47 now. So,
Yeah.
it was just interesting to me how people were being strategic about going out there and trying to answer these questions. And
Oh,
one
yeah.
one of my favorite clips of this challenge is you see Adrian in the waiting area, right? And Mason's in front of her, I believe.
She has it with multiple different people.
Yes. And so she's got no
Chris,
idea what she's
Mason.
doing, but she's smart and she sees which ping pong ball Mason grabs. And she knows that he has some understanding of Survivor. So she's like, I'm going to trust Mason. So she grabs the same ping pong ball as him.
Hmm.
And if you go back to Survivor Second Chances,
Hmm.
Steven Fishback, great player. He realized people were kind of copying him, so he was accidentally grabbing the wrong one and then like, I got you, and then go get the right one. So,
Yeah.
Mason didn't do that. It wasn't that epic, but it was just smart gameplay by Adrian, who didn't
Hmm.
have any idea what these answers were to kind of like see what other people were picking and see if that would help her get there.
And to give credit, I think I saw Anna do it at least once too. It just didn't quite get her, as far as it got Adrian. Because I saw Adrian do it at least 2 different times because
Hmm.
she did it with Chris as well. And I actually asked her about that, and she said, I wasn't confident about I had no idea about the answer. And if somebody came up and was acting confident and grabbed a ping pong ball I was like, okay, well, yeah, I'll go with them.
Yeah.
We only did 3 answer multiple choice. So if you get the first one wrong, you have a 50-50.
Right.
So, it's not as long as you can keep all of that straight because there was like 5 or 6 stations. At 5 stations, I think it was 5 stations.
It was five.
So
Yeah.
there's 5 different questions spread all around this property. So the hardest part, I would assume, no one's really said anything about this, but um, I would assume the hardest part would be keeping all of that straight. It's like, okay,
Mm,
this is question number one. Was question number one over there, or was it over there, or was it over? Like, so there's 5 different areas, and if you don't know exactly where you got this question from, you might run to the wrong place, and now you're tired and you've run for no reason. So. Overall, I thought it was a fun challenge. It was a crazy challenge to edit. We have so much footage because every person because of the fact that I had all these stations, I had to have a judge stationed at every station, just make sure there's no foul play, no one was somehow cheating, or I don't know. They were allowed to talk because you couldn't. It was mostly just policing, like that. You didn't have a man and a man both at the same station, and they had
right.
to wait in line, but a guy and a girl could come up at the same time. And you saw Adrian, or not Adrian, you saw Anna try to work with Eli, and she asks, "Can he talk? Like, can we help each other?" And then she asked Eli if he knew the answer, and he says, "I have no idea." So it didn't help her, unfortunately. But they're trying to collaborate. So, but because of the fact that we had all these different judges and they were all videoing, so then they are the videographers and the judge. They're just standing there videoing with their iPhones. So because of that, though, I had 5 different angles of the entire challenge. It was a lot of footage, but I ended up cutting it way down just to, because it's the same angle, it's the same thing. People are running
Yeah.
up, they're grabbing ping pong balls. It's like, do you want to watch 30 minutes of this challenge? Because you could. So I chose against doing that.
No, and I will say this, based on some of the video footage we have had this season and the lack of footage we've had,
I
I'd
know.
rather have more than less, right? You can
Yeah,
always
it's
cut
true.
and edit. You can't
It's
bring
true.
stuff back that you didn't video. So,
Yeah.
that was a great job by our videography team there to make sure
Hmm.
they were actually recording in the right spots and helping us judge as well, being multitaskers for this challenge because it was, I mean, it was a big challenge.
Yeah,
And
the big moment in the game.
and you had four players that were going to move on from the first leg of getting all the questions right to now having to solve a word puzzle.
Hmm.
And, I won't lie, I was a little bit surprised that Seth ended up becoming the guy that was challenging Chris for the questions. And Seth's an athletic guy, right? He can
Yeah,
good stamina. So that doesn't surprise me that he was able to go back out there and get the right answers. And he's a smart guy too. So remember which ones were wrong that he didn't get right at the beginning.
yeah,
So, but I just assumed that you would probably see Mason and Chris going head to head for the guy to get back in. And I thought Adrian made the most sense probably for the girls. Bailey, I was really impressed with her though to get to
yeah.
that
Me too.
point because, she's one of those people that just didn't seem very confident in herself early on.
Yeah,
And we talked about it like she did a really good job on that puzzle at Advantage Island against Moretta, ended up winning that advantage out there at Advantage Island. So she put herself in a good spot, but I think that the stars kind of aligned for Adrian, who got blindsided by an idol, and she wouldn't have been voted out had Drew not played his idol. So she goes back in the game, and now Chris, who said he was strategically doing this, it's like he prophesied what was going to happen, and so we can start
it's
calling Chris the
crazy.
prophet because this man he predicted what was going to happen, and he did it.
It's
Came through.
crazy. It's crazy. So this round is pretty interesting from here. I mean, it's pretty straightforward in terms of the vote, but the repercussions of what happened before and what happens moving forward, this is like one of those couple of pivot points that you can look at. I think that once we see, obviously we have perfect knowledge of what's going to happen, but um, I would say that overall, over the course of the entire game, it's pretty easy even now to see that the Neil vote off is probably the biggest pivot point in the game. If
Hmm.
Eli plays his steal a vote and votes off Sonya instead, now not only is Neil in the game, but then you have Siakam with the numbers. So instead of Shibwe, and then you can still vote off Chris if you want. He was a part of original Shibwe. And then if Chris comes back in, you know, that doesn't dramatically change the numbers because now you have a Siakam supporter in there instead of a Shibwe supporter. And who knows? Um, the real interesting part of it is the Leah and Annie of it all. There's those two original Siakam members and Adrian, those three original Siakam members that really quickly um, drop. I mean, they drop that like Siakam strong idea at least for a more mixed group moving forward. Um, it was a pretty like we had a pretty high majority when they voted off Chris. It was like 6 or 7 of the 8 people. It was the same here with Drew. Um, I think it was everybody except for Drew. Was it all for but one? It was pretty close if it wasn't all for one. Oh no,
Yeah, I
that's
think
right.
Drew voted or
Chris
Chris voted for Sonya
Chris
with
voted
the
for Sonya.
Y and
Chris
spelled
voted
her
for
name
Sonya.
wrong because he
Yeah.
was trying to throw a sin off there, like, hey, somebody else wrote her name wrong and she was kind of upset about it. So he's like, I'm gonna do it because she won't think it's me and put
He
that on
he
somebody else.
yeah, he says in the episode he's trying to like basically put a target on her so that other people might be like, "Hey, I wonder who voted for Sonya." Like, just in advance of getting her out a few rounds later, I guess is what his thought process is.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's unanimous. Like Chris could have voted for Drew, and he probably knew that was what was happening. What is interesting is Drew's plea to Chris makes a ton of sense to me, but it also would have, in my opinion, made sense for Drew to feel the same way when he voted Chris out originally.
Mm-hmm.
So Drew's plea is, well, what's going to happen next after you vote me out? If they're for voting off people because they're good at challenges and they're obvious like big target threats, aren't you, Chris, going to be one of those threats? Um, and I'm like, yeah, it's a great argument, Drew. It makes tons of sense. Why didn't you think of that before you voted off Chris and
Yeah.
before you like he wanted to save Eli, and I guess the thought process is like he just did not realize how big of a threat he was coming across as when he voted off Chris, and he just thought Chris was a bigger target than he was, and at that moment maybe he was. But you have played two idols, one of which you canceled off the entire tribe's votes to vote to save yourself, and then the other time you did not need to play it. And then you publicly tried to give your necklace that you won to a different player at Tribal Council, it just makes you a threat. And you won a challenge or two, won the food challenge. I
Won the
can't
food
remember
challenge.
now.
I think
I
that's
think that
it.
might have been the only individual challenge. So you won a challenge, and to me, it's kind of like Mason, whereas like you were a little. I think he was a lot more undercover in the pre-merge, but part of why he was the more undercover is because Siakam only lost one challenge before the swap, and then he had to play his idol the first time. So I think up to that point, you played the game you had to play if you're Drew.
Mm.
My qualms with his game at this point would be you did not need to play the idol the second time. And if you were going to try to save Eli, you probably should have also tried to save Chris. Like, I know that,
Yeah.
sure, like Chris is on Shibwe, but like, if you're trying to make the plea that like the big threats should stick together, then you should have done that not just now when it's your neck on the chopping block, but you should have done that a few rounds ago. And so, not voting off Chris, keeping him around till more like six, somewhere around there. We only have to get through a couple more rounds before you're in the final three. And I don't know if he was afraid of Chris winning a bunch of challenges. To this point, I don't think Chris had won any. And he won one
He won the
individual
axe
challenge, the
throwing.
axe
That was
throwing.
it. Yeah.
That was it. So and then he was a returning player challenge. So that, he only had won one challenge before he got voted off the first time. And it's just like, you know, you went from doing a good job of keeping your threat level low to doing a bunch of things multiple rounds in a row.
Yeah.
Um, and it just raised his threat level to a point that it was too high.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up great points. He definitely was almost playing it as like, oh, the vote's not on me this round. Cool, let's keep it moving that way. Instead of thinking long term here strategically, he was playing strategically more round to round than he
Hmm.
was long term. How's this going to benefit me? It seemed pretty much like he had this little alliance with Eli and Cameron, but they
Yeah.
were always going to be outnumbered by the girls. And so it seems like they thought they might be able to pull Sonya in because she had worked with Cameron before. But, Chris had been writing Cameron's name down at multiple tribal councils before that. And so I
Hmm.
think that maybe Cameron was a little bit hesitant to say, hey, let's try to pull Chris in here. But, Chris was kind of all over the place. We saw it with his votes. Like
Hmm.
before he was originally voted out, like nobody really knew
And
what
and
side
even
he was
here,
on. Yeah. So, I just think that they probably overthought it a little bit in terms of that group, Eli, Cameron, and Drew, and trying to be creative and sneaky. And, I think that if he would have played the necklace for Eli, he would have gone immediately. So
hmm
it's just now or around later, it's just like if you would have kept Chris, you would have maybe had numbers if Chris would have worked with you. That's the question. I don't know if Chris would have jumped in and said, yeah, let's do that. But,
yeah,
this all comes back down to Eli not playing the steal the vote correctly and keeping Neil in the game because Neil would have definitely kept Drew in the game and try to work because he was so Siakam strong. And
yeah,
I think the girls would have probably turned on Neil, but I don't think Neil would have turned on his guys that were
yeah.
willing to stay with him and bleed
No.
red. So, just a couple moves here and there could have completely changed the trajectory of this, of this game of Survivor for these players. But
Hmm.
unfortunately, some bad plays and learning on the fly will bite you in the butt in the end.
Yeah, and I don't want to be too critical of Drew because I don't have a lot of confidence that Chris would have worked with him if Drew had been like, "Hey, they're all going to vote you off," in the round where Chris got voted off originally, right, a few weeks ago.
Mm.
If Drew had been like, "Hey, they're all going to vote you off, but I want to keep you, work with me," it's me and Cameron and Eli and you, and then maybe they have Sonya. I don't know. That
I
would
think
have
it would have been
been
4-4 at that point.
well. If they get Sonya, it's 5-3.
Yeah.
So and like Sonya had worked with Chris in the past. Sonya worked with Cameron in the past. Like, yes, there was some issues there with Eli, and Sonya, I think, was very loyal to Cameron and Chris, but I think she was very leery of Siakam. So maybe that wouldn't have worked. Maybe you can pull in Leah though, because it's Chris's wife, and Drew had worked with Leah. The only problem is then who are you targeting? Sonya? The Cameron didn't want to get rid of Sonya. You're targeting Annie or Adrian. Adrian's gone. Annie or I mean, I don't know if Leah would have
Moretta.
wanted maybe Moretta, but does Chris want to vote off Moretta? Like this is his original. This is where like that deep loyalty to those original tribes. Yes, Siakam was the tribe that like really preached that with through Neil, but Shibwe was loyal to themselves as well.
Hmm.
It wasn't as loud about it. They weren't as loud about it, but
Right,
it's
right.
definitely like Cameron voted off Neil because of tribe loyalty, and because he knew that Sonya would work with him because of the tribe, because they had experience working together as a tribe.
Hmm.
So that's where it becomes really difficult to figure things out because everyone's so locked in tribe-wise. And it's something that I've been trying to like find ways to break up. And I think it's just a matter of like you said in the past in different recaps, we should kind of expect these players that don't have as much of a background in games like this or in the actual show to play like it was in Borneo,
Yeah,
and to be pretty straightforward with it. And that's fine. But that's what we should expect.
yeah.
Um, so
And this does
and
kind of go back to our advantage island, right? Because we were
yes,
trying to create
yes,
strategy talk to try to be like, oh, we
cross
got to worry about
tribal, cross tribal
yes,
connections through Advantage Island, and
yeah,
instead of that happening, everyone just told everyone everything through their
yeah.
whole
So
original tribe.
we were almost trying to force gameplay maybe a little bit too much with Advantage Island, and it maybe was a bit of a flop in terms of how
Yeah,
productive it was. But
yeah,
we've still seen Advantage play work out for players, so it's not like it's been a total flop. But it's just we were trying to create for new players an environment that feels more Survivor like to see how they would respond. And I think part of it was just everybody was afraid to get caught in a lie, so they just told the truth on
yeah,
everything. And I think, when you're a little too truthful in Survivor, you can only get so far with that strategy. So
yeah,
that is what it boils down to for a lot of these players. But we do need to talk about the twist a little bit here in this round because when the returning players came, you told the six that made it, to the returning player challenge that were already safe, hadn't been voted out yet. You don't have a challenge for this round, and
yeah,
you guys are going to tribal, and the two winners are immune. So
yeah,
basically, the six that were still in the game did not get a chance to really defend themselves and win immunity. So I could see where maybe a player that got voted out there would feel a little bit slighted just because they didn't even get a chance to win immunity whatsoever. But at the same time, that's Survivor. You just never know what's going to happen. And this is why you can't just be good at challenges. You have to have that social game and the strategy game because if you form the right relationships, then you probably aren't as worried. But, you know, a guy like Drew, his back was against the wall. He just tried to play his necklace for Eli, who got voted out the round before him. And now he has no chance to save himself. He has no idols, nothing. So it just seemed like writing was on the wall at this point for him. But at the same time, I could understand why he would feel like he got maybe a little bit hosed with not getting a chance to defend himself in a challenge.
yeah. And I'll give him credit. He's never expressed any kind of frustration.
No, he fist
He
bumped
had,
everybody when he got voted out. I mean,
yeah, but like not even just that. I mean towards me, or
oh,
the game.
yeah,
Like
true.
he was like very grateful to have been able to participate at a great time. He was a great juror. So if he had that frustration, it was never vocalized, and I would be understanding of that frustration, but I also still stand by the twist. I
Yeah.
think like my perception of it is, it might feel bad, but just the same way that a bad tribe swap could feel bad, if you can't get through one round, then but if you can't get through one round without a challenge, without winning a challenge, because like just to say like, what if they had a challenge and Drew lost it? Would he get voted off here? Yes. So like,
Yeah.
if he had to win this round's challenge, then he wasn't in a good position. Um, like if you feel like you have to win, because then like the logic is if he needed a challenge to stay in the game and needed to win that certain challenge, then he would have had to have won every challenge from here on out, basically,
Mm.
which is really crazy and tough to do. And also he's getting a little bit he. So here's the thing, uh, he played the idol in the second idol absolutely incorrectly. If he has that idol, then he's not going home here. And I don't know if it changes things long term, but it's like you and I'm all for it. I would rather somebody play the idol and not need to play it than go home with it in their pocket.
Hmm.
But if you're gonna be mad about, which he wasn't, but if you're gonna be mad about a game twist, then my counter argument would be like, what are you gonna do win the next five challenges?
Right.
And you had an idol and you misplayed it, and you had an immunity necklace and you thought you were gonna make this big move, but did not check with the production at all in terms of how the rules on that. Nobody else had tried to give it up. And it's like, so you've done some things that made you a bigger target. that you did not have to do. Like you didn't need to do either one of those things. You could have just let Eli go,
Yeah.
and you could have not played your idol, and then no one will. So then instead of it being like, man, because that was like 3 rounds in a row, or 3 out of 4 rounds, something like that, where it was like
Hmm.
Drew is like to the point where there, I don't remember if it was I've been editing episodes 9 and 10, so I don't even remember now if this was in episode 8 or because yes, in 8 he in this episode he like pretends to pull one out of his
Yes,
sock,
he fake stands up.
and a sneak peek in next week he like pretends to pull one out from the jury in episode 9, and everyone laughs on the in the game. So like this is so it's to the point where it's a running bit that like always has an idol. So like if that's how you have to play the game though, then you're kind of behind the 8 ball a little bit.
Hmm.
And the one other negative about Advantage Island is because of the fact that we did get some advantages out into the. I don't feel like my concern was that we would flood the game with advantages. That did not happen. But what happened for some reason is that people, not everybody, but other people other than Drew, kind of just sat on their advantages for a really long time. Obviously, when Eli got voted off, 2 steal votes were played there, and then Drew played 2 different idols. But other than that, people have been sitting on advantages. And so instead of idols or things being re-hidden after the merge, that has not happened as much because people have been sitting on them.
Yeah.
So it's just there's a lot going on with that, and if you have to, um, if you're Drew, you have to realize that I've done 3 different things in the last 3 or 4 rounds that were pretty flashy, and
Hmm.
2 of them I did not need to do.
I want to
Um,
go. I want to go back to his second idol find because right, like
yeah,
this is a big moment in the game because he kind of
yeah,
tricks Eli, puts the burlap sack back in there, and Eli's
which is
like,
funny
"What
because it
is
wasn't intentional.
right?" And you're right. It was all
I
like
mean, it
just
wasn't intentional for Eli to be
yes. He
tricked. It
just
was
put it
just
in there,
yeah,
thinking, I don't want to carry this. I just want to put this little token in my pocket that says that I've got an idol. What would have been really smart because he told everybody last time that he had an idol. And so
mhm,
everybody was aware of it. And the girls, they came up with a plan to vote him out, knowing he had an idol. And they didn't throw any vote on anybody else to save themselves or anything like that. So he has all the power now. He plays his idol. He gets to pick who goes home. I think Drew messed up here in terms of not telling them with that idol because he could have used it
yeah,
as a threat. He could have said,
yeah,
"Look, I found this idol during the merge feast. Um, I'm planning on playing it if you guys vote for me, or you can work with me and we can save this for when we need it later in the game." And then that could have been like, "Oh shoot, we don't want to vote for Drew because now he can play his idol." And
yeah.
are these players Survivor savvy enough to know to split the votes at this time?
Yeah. No, hang on. Do you mean for this round, or do you mean for when he actually plays the idol and votes off Adrian?
I'm saying when he played the idol, the second idol that he found, right? So
Hmm.
he's already played the first idol,
Yeah.
got Adrian out of the game. They have the merge feast. He finds that second idol. Now
Yeah.
he can use this and say when he's
Yeah. He
talking
should
to
have been
somebody,
telling
whether he's
people.
pulling Annie over or Sonya over or whoever, hey, I've got a second idol and I'm planning on playing it.
Hmm.
But we can work together and maybe save this for couple more rounds and get somebody out that we want to get out. Let's work together. He could have used it as a bit more of a threat
Hmm.
instead of just like, oh, I've got this sneaky thing in the back of my pocket, which is it's a balance there. You got to find the right balance. But
Yeah.
if he would have realized, man, I've only got 3 people in my alliance right now with me, Eli, and
Well,
Cameron
and Eli was gone by now, but
by
yes,
now. But I'm
when
saying
he found it,
previously,
yeah, when he
when he
found it,
found it,
yes.
he was outnumbered 3-5 or 3-4
Hmm.
at least, with Chris kind of being
Agreed.
that floating person.
Yeah.
So he could have been a little bit smarter and more strategic with how he played the idol in terms of trying to lure people in to say, hey, I've got this as a threat because now Annie probably in my mind would think, oh no, Drew's got an idol. We don't want to vote him out because if he knows it's coming, he's going to play it. And I
Hmm.
think Leo might try to talk her out of it, but I think she might get too paranoid. I think Moretta would probably just go along with the plan, and Sonny would probably just go along with the plan, and then Chris was just kind of playing in the middle. I think that there could have been a much different dynamic had he used his idol more of a power play instead of whipping it out, playing it for himself, and then not really needing to play it at that point. So
Yeah.
that's the only thing I was thinking of in terms of how Drew maybe could have played this differently. But ultimately, the fact that he pulled that idol out and surprised them all, they're like, when did you get a second idol?
Hmm.
Now he became even more of a threat. And that's
Yeah.
what got him like really as a target. And had he not won that food eating challenge, he probably goes in that round over Eli.
Yeah. And I honestly, now that you bring that up, I think he should have done that the first time as well. So here's the thing. When he votes off Adrian, they all knew he had an idol, and we have no video. Now, maybe this happened more than I am aware of. We have no video footage of Drew really trying to go around and talk to the girls one-on-one. And we do hear, I'm pretty sure it's been talked about in confessionals. And if this is a spoiler for a future round, I'm sorry. I'm going to mention a confessional. Moretta, I'm pretty sure it's either this round or last round. Moretta says that Drew told her that they were all planning on voting Moretta out. And Drew makes it the way that Moretta tells it, she felt like Drew was saying, I would have voted you out if you had not won the axe throwing competition. And so Moretta takes that personally and does not want to work with Drew now.
Yeah.
Whereas Drew had no reason to share that information with Moretta at all. So that's number one, just a flat out bad move. Number two, if you just don't do that, you go to Moretta and say, hey, I'm pretty sure all the girls are against me. Who do you want to vote for? I'm playing my idol on myself. You and I should work together. And then you go to Leah and say, hey, I know all your girls are tight and we can't vote for Moretta. I'm playing my idol. Who do you want to vote for? And he goes to Annie. Says, hey, I know all your girls are tight, but I'm playing my idol. So who do you want to vote off? And then he goes to Adrian and says, hey, you know what I mean? He goes to all four of them and says, hey, I'm playing my idol. Who do you want to vote for? And hits them all against each other and then doesn't play his idol.
Yeah. I mean,
Like,
he could have worked some magic here. He had
what I
a
mean?
lot of opportunity and some power. He just didn't play it right. He was like too honest the first time and then
Yeah.
not honest enough. You know, it's like
Yeah.
he was one of those
There were
players that
options.
could have,
There were options.
yeah. And it's just, you know, it's easy for us, the quarterback couch here, you know, what
Yes.
was that's that right?
Armchair quarterback.
Yeah, armchair quarterback, Monday morning quarterback,
Monday morning
right?
quarterback. Yeah.
It's easy to be that person and say, well, you could have done this, you could have done that. I mean, look at me in my game. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. I had no freaking clue. I'm just like, hey, you know, I got this idol. I'm trying to keep it all secret. Boom, whip it out. You know, one person, stupid Caleb, you know, I was like, I'll vote with you. I'm like, don't vote with me. You know, vote with them, vote me out. I want to play this on somebody else. He's like, nah, let's vote this person out. Still, it ruined my game. I would have voted out the winner at that point. That's what would have happened. Chris would have been gone if I didn't have to, you know, worry about Caleb going in there and splitting the votes between Kirsten and Chris. It's just, you just never know what's going to happen, how people play. But like Caleb was kind of smart in that regard to be like, hey, they're all voting for you. I'm going to throw a vote on somebody else that I don't want to work with because he had worked with Chris. And so that's where you could have got other players to work with Drew potentially. And me and Caleb ended up working together from that. So,
Yeah.
you know, from experience, I can kind of tell you just like sometimes it doesn't work out. Save yourself. That's always a smart thing in Survivor. But at the same time, if you can work the relationship correctly, you can really do some damage with some idle play and idle not play, but at least the threat of an idol.
Yeah, for sure. So, definitely would love to see Drew play again.
Yeah.
Thought he was a lot of fun, and you know, if he can manage the threat level, and maybe in more of an all-star type setting, or just a returning player season at all, he's more on level ground with some of those people.
Yeah.
You know, someone that's a little bit more willing to make big moves and willing to do that kind of stuff. But obviously you have to match your whole season, your cast. You cannot just, you know, play how you want to play and say, well, whatever, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. If you want to win, you got to match everybody else. So
yeah. I would love to see Drew come back and play. I think him on an all-star season would be pretty fun because, like you said, I don't think he'd be viewed as a massive threat with some of the other players we have that have been a lot bigger, louder threats than him. And I think that he could kind of, you know, work his way into the cracks with these people and kind of be looked at as maybe a little bit under the radar. I mean, I do think, not predicting what he would do in the future, but I think that he could probably have another pretty solid run if we were to do an all-star game. I like the way that he played because he's aggressive. He wants to win. He's going to be on the hunt for idols, but he's going to do it with a very, I wouldn't say strategic, but it is a little bit strategic because he's like, doesn't allow himself, he knows how to control his emotions, right?
Yeah.
That's the one thing I thought was really good with him. Like sometimes when you get blindsided, even in this game, you're kind of mad. You're like really annoyed about it. You're like, are you kidding me? Like, how did that happen? He's like, nah, good job. This bump. Like, just like the all around good sport. And, you know, it's a game at the end of the day. And I think that he just has a level head and I respect that a lot from him. So, fun player for sure.
Oh yeah. At this point, we have probably gone on talking as long as the actual episode, maybe even longer. So let's go ahead and cut it off here. Look forward to episode 9 on Sunday, and then we'll come back and talk about it on Tuesday.
See ya.